Hello and welcome to the January 2026 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. Our guest this evening is cartoonist and freelance writer Bob Eckstein. Bob is noted for his work in the New Yorker, among many, many other publications. Anybody who knows me knows what a fan I am of gag cartoons. And
Don, you just muted yourself, honey.
That wasn't me. I didn't do that.
Don, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, there we go. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, meeting Bob by chance in the hallway was one of the best things that happened to me over that weekend at that conference. Immediately realized he was a very, very special person, and we became friends almost immediately. And I was absolutely delighted when he agreed to join us for this evening's meeting. I'm going to read you a brief biography of Bob, and then we're going to throw some questions at him. Bob Eckstein is an award-winning writer, New Yorker cartoonist, and author of the New York Times best-selling Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores, and has been speaking publicly for years against online shopping to raise awareness for independent bookstores. Bob's humor has appeared in Mad, McSweeney's, National Lampoon, the New York Times, Reader's Digest, Spy, Wall Street Journal, and publications worldwide. His work has been exhibited in the Cartoon Art Museum of San Francisco, Smithsonian Institution, the Cartoon Museum of London, and many others. Eckstein has spoke on over 200 TV and radio shows like Good Morning America and places like NYPL, Miami Book Fair, the Norman Rockwell Museum, and the Broiler Club. He teaches writing and cartooning around the world, including the School of Visual Arts, New York University, Pratt Institute, and Yonsei University in South Korea. His new book is Footnotes from the Most Fascinating Museums, Stories and Memorable Moments from People Who Love Museums. Folks, let's welcome Bob Eckstein. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Don. Wow, what an introduction.
Yeah, you've done a lot, man. But I wanted to start by asking you at what age you realized that you had some skill as both a writer and a cartoonist. When did you first realize that you could potentially make a living doing these things?
Well, in high school, I started trying to do some work at like little fanzines that existed. Back then, I wasn't making much money, but I was getting published doing that. And in college, I started thinking in terms of being a freelance illustrator. And I took a serious, effort to learn how to work in magazines and editorials, doing artwork. Wasn't really writing much, but I did take some writing classes. And one of my teachers was very encouraging. At the end of each class, she would read my piece out loud anonymously to the class. And that really gave me confidence that maybe I could do that. And I started expanding into doing a little bit of writing here and there. But, it never happens overnight. The whole thing is sort of a slow process. I mean, with lots of starts and stops. I didn't finish high school. I started going to college early. I was sneaking into school because I was totally bored with high school. So I went to Pratt Institute and sat in on the classes, realizing that they took attendance of the people in the class, but they didn't really make much attention to the people who were not on their attendance. So you could actually sit in classes. And when it came time to go to the school officially, I went back to the teachers and said, I've been sitting in your classes. Could we make it official? And they would write me a letter of recommendation to get me into school. So I didn't really have a moment in which I said, oh, I can make a living from this. Again, it was just like little things here, little things there. As far as cartooning, that came much later. It was something, the cartoons came just as a dare. I was at a lunch with a cartoonist named Sam Gross, and we had become friends. And he had suggested I come back. Because, well, actually, I asked if I could come back to the lunch. He invited me to the New York lunch, and I had a good time, and the food was good. So I said, can I come back? And he said, you could come back, but bring back 10 sketches, 10 cartoons. Up until that time, I had really not done any single panel cartoons. So I did return, He introduced me to Bob Mankoff, and they actually purchased the first cartoon that I tried drawing. There was beginner's luck, though. It didn't happen that fast after that. They happened to buy the first cartoon I drew, but it would be a while before I sold the second cartoon and the third. And then I slowly realized how difficult it was. At the time, I didn't know because I didn't know anything about the business. But then as I submitted, I realized there's a lot of rejection in the business. So it was a learning process. As a matter of fact, if you'd like, if it's okay, I have a couple of slides I could show.
Please.
Yeah,
That'd be
so yeah, Maya could interrupt and tell me when she wants to catch a question in the get a question in the chat. I won't be able to see the chat right now, so I'm just going to share the images, but we all could talk over them. They're kind of random and they're all over the place. I just threw this in so you can see some of the books because possible maybe you're familiar with one of my books already. And this is actually one of my last books. But everything that happened to basically was by accident. All these different things just kind of converge. Even like meeting my wife was, she was an enemy of mine in college. And then we ran into each other again at a funeral 12 years later. And then that time we got along a little better. We kind of said, well, this might as well happen. And we eloped to Iceland. And she's been a big influence on my career, encouraging me to try different things. Here's a couple of cartoons with no caption. I have a few captionless cartoons. And when I'm working, I'm always trying to do everything with the least amount of words. Whether it's telling a story in a book or doing a cartoon or whatever, I'm always trying to simplify it down as much as possible without dumbing it down. I always want to also have the reader be involved and engaged in the story or the cartoon by filling in the blanks. Like in this case, it's up to the reader to decide if they get the joke. They have to kind of piece it together, come up with that eureka moment that they get the joke. Otherwise, it's too obvious and it doesn't work. At some point, I decided that I was going to do a book about snowmen. I was being approached by agents and publishers if I would do a book. I was writing columns for different magazines. And I had not written a book yet, but I decided my first book was going to be a mystery, but I didn't want to make it about crime. I wanted it to be like a life mystery, like who made the first sandwich or something like that. So I decided I was going to do who made the first snowman. And I spent about 7 years traveling around the world, talking with art historians and experts in different fields. How I got an agent was I made this business card and someone introduced me to an agent and I gave him this card on the advice of a friend who told me, if you're going to be a good freelancer and you're going to be a good writer, you have to decide you're an expert at something. So I just declared myself a snowman expert. And I gave this card to the agent and she accepted me as a client right away. And then my research led me to these unusual findings, like this was an image from the Royal Hague Library. It's the Royal Library at The Hague. The Hague has this library that has over 8 million images, and I spent days there just looking through all these old engravings and prints, and eventually found this little illustration in the margins of an illuminated manuscript that's dated 1380. And it's sort of a spectacular example of the first snowman that's insulting two religions at the same time. And that's because this hat would be used as a symbol in Gothic paintings to signify someone Jewish. And this snowman melting is alongside a solemn passage of the crucifixion of Christ. So it's a very unusual, very weird beginning for snowmen. And then from there, I collected clues and collected things. This is a snowman collection. I've collected over 800 items of snowmen. This is my living room. It's kind of overtaken everything, collecting all these different things. And of course, some of it's silly, but some of it's actually historical. And it was actually the Snowman book that came before doing cartoons and working for the New Yorker. Um, it was an intermission in my book. I needed an intermission because it was too academic. So I decided to use New Yorker cartoons. So that's when I hired Sam Gross to do a couple of cartoons for me. And that's how our friendship began. And then the invitation on my birthday to go to the New Yorker lunch. And then from there, I've done some cartoons for them. Up until the time that Bob Mankoff got fired, I was kind of a regular and actually became a writer at the New Yorker until the editors I work with, they were also fired. So that's kind of like sort of a trend for my whole career with all the magazines is that it ebbs and flows depending on who got fired and moved and changed. I kind of, you know, sort of a victim of some of the changes with the editors. So I'm going to pause my speaking for a minute, just see if there's any questions. Maya, is there anybody with any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions yet.
Okay,
Bob, I think it's important to know who Sam Gross is. Perhaps one of the most revered and respected single panel cartoonists of the late 20th century. Would you agree?
absolutely. Yeah, he was the greatest living cartoonist, and he was one of my best friends. And he took me under his wing. And you'd see his work in National Lampoon and all over the New Yorker and other places. And he could be sometimes blue and sometimes clean, but he was considered a cartoonist. Everyone loved Sam Gross and his work. And my work never approached the level of his work, but he definitely always inspired me. As a matter of fact, there were times in which I would be stuck coming up with an idea, and the way I would come up with the idea would be placing myself in his shoes. I would ask myself, what would Sam do? You know, how would Sam solve the problem? The way I would come up with something like this, for instance, this took about 2 years. Initially, it would be a different cartoon altogether, but there would be some place in me that knew that it wasn't there yet. It wasn't its best. I'm always asking myself, is it finished? What if I did this? What if I did that? And in this case, this initially was a lawyer visiting someone in a jail cell, and the lawyer had a Rubik's Cube that was fixed, and the other person in jail had a mixed up Rubik's Cube. And then I just knew that if I worked at it, the message could be more and more universal. And that's the goal, to have it work on different levels and appeal to more people. Actually, this cartoon is quite well known outside of our country. On Facebook, it had over 1 million likes from other people's site. As a matter of fact, you made it as a cartoonist when someone takes your cartoon and uses it as a tattoo on their ass. And that's the case with this. I've gotten photographs of people with their tattoo of this thing. There's actually another cartoon that is actually gone viral. I think it's one of the most famous panel cartoons in the world, but I'll get to that later. Skipping ahead, this is my latest book that I did after the museum book on the side. I often work on about 3 books at the same time, and they all kind of overlap, and they're in different stages of finish. And in this case, it was a collection of great writers and their cats, how their cats inspired them and was their muse. I became friends with who I consider our generation's greatest humorist, Jack Handey. Jack Handey is in my book because he has this cat that he beloves and even writes about. You would know the cat from the famous Saturday Night Live skit, Toonces the Driving Cat. And I got a chance to actually meet quite a bit of writers from Saturday Night Live who they follow my newsletter. They're actually been very supportive and they're friends. I contend that I have the funniest supportive friends in the world. And that's been a great help with me in so many ways, either for feedback or support, just morale, and just inspiring me to be better. Um, Steve Martin, by the way, actually helped me with my museum book. I got a chance to meet him in person for the first time not long ago. And here's the cat. I found out that if you keep doing cat stuff, kind of escalates. And people have been asking me to do more and more cat things, more cat books. And I have to call it end to it. But there was talk of me doing cookbooks for cats or cookbooks by cats. And it led to this one, tasty 1 minute meal. Oops, I'll go back one. Oops, I'm trying to go backwards. It's making me go forward. I'm just going to do this again. Okay. Let's skip over one. But here's some of the other prototypes. We talk about doing cookbooks, but I have to take a break from animals and cookbooks for a while. And what I decided to do was to design a game. I wanted to do something that was away from publishing and some of the pitfalls with publishing and challenge myself doing something different. But it's going to still stay with books, kind of. But I came up with this game called Writer's Block, and it was well received with some publishers, and I'm in the middle of doing it now. In 10 seconds, the object of the game is to finish your book before everyone else you're playing against finishes their book, and you could give them distractions to slow them down. So you could give them like a nap card so they could take a nap, or something else like that's a distraction. And then there's ways for you to do better, like if you have an espresso maker, you'll finish faster.
I love that, Bob. I love the whole concept of that. Now I want to play it.
Thanks. It really is fun. One part of the game making process is testing. I never thought about that when I started working on this game, but they had me do a whole bunch of prototypes and send it out to a whole bunch of people for testing and to take their notes and to improve the game. And they allowed this thing to marinate. They didn't rush it. They really gave everyone a plenty of time to figure it out. As a matter of fact, the game is different than what you see here. It's since changed in the artwork, taking into account every little detail regarding the color, lines, font. Everything has been like scrutinized and debated over. And I'll take a break, let everyone ask me any questions, because coming up, I was just going to discuss briefly AI. And it's been a very big topic everywhere I go. And I'd be curious to know within this group if it's on your radar or if it's simply something that doesn't pertain to this group really.
It's hugely on our radar, Bob. We talk about this within the group a lot about the role and the influence and the potential problems with AI. So yeah, it's a subject very close to this organization.
I mean, it's something that's, scary. And I've been trying to be open-minded and also defensive when it comes to using AI for science, technology, and medicine and all the things that it really could save lives. But when it comes to being creative and being a screenwriter, which I also write, I'm writing a movie, or writing books or doing cartoons and stuff, it really, all it is somewhat of a shortcut, and it's making young people lazy. And it's really, I feel, a very dangerous thing. People don't realize. I was an art director for a short time. And I had a staff of a dozen illustrators. And it came a point that to cut and save money, the publisher had fired my boss. And as a result, I lost the job and I had to fire all 12 illustrators who were all replaced by AI. And the publisher then started using AI for all the covers and interior illustrations. And the scary part about all of this is I really don't think the public realizes or recognize the difference because everything in America, we've been conditioned to appreciate crap. And everyone's level standard has been lowered in so many ways, in so many venues, that things like this can happen. People are not saying they miss this or they miss, that. It's everyone is sort of like going to the common denominator. And I'm not quite sure how to solve that situation where you prove that we're moving away from excellence and we're going into what is sort of a slum of creativity. This is a cartoon that's it's possible maybe someone in this group has seen before. It's I think it's been called the most stolen cartoon in the world. It's constantly being used and stolen all over the place from my agents and the website that represents me. They say they have endless amounts of cases against having this cartoon taken. And lately, this came up. This is an AI version of the cartoon. And as a matter of fact, I know people are submitting cartoons to the New Yorker that are created by AI. And I talked to somebody about this and I said, how did this happen? What do you do to come up with a group of cartoons that you're going to submit? And they said, well, they type in think Bob Eckstein, or maybe another cartoonist combined. And then next thing you know, there's a bunch of cartoons that look vaguely similar to mine. And they spent 15 minutes to do it. This is just a quick thing I'm going to show. If anybody wants a free subscription to my newsletter, you could scan this if you want with your phone. You're welcome to do that. I'm going to stop sharing the screen in a minute. The only thing I had left to show was I was going to show my workspace because my workspace is unusual. And I always find it interesting to see other people's workspace. You might have questions about how I work or whatever. So I thought it'd be fun to show that. So I'm going to show pictures here. I created the space because my next book was going to be about Arctic exploration that takes place in a ship. So I wanted to have a nautical feel. So I kind of made this space really feel like going to transport me to someplace else. And I also like to try to have a space to work that's going to get away from all the emails and the cell phones. So I have an outside space as well, which I'm going to show in a moment. This office, by the way, has been televised. It's been on TV a couple of times, and it's been in magazines because it was voted one of the top 10 coolest offices in the world. There was a vote or something of the top 10 offices, and somehow people, knew about this and they saw it on TV. So, and as a result, I have to say, people send me these gauges. All the stuff that you see in the room, people send me to put in my office. It's really, really great. But this is my outside space. As much time as I spent on the inside office, which is really a nice way of saying I procrastinate to do work by just saying I'm doing, I'm really just fixing up my office. But out here, using some roof jacks, I made what's called an Adirondack bench. It's just a couple of boards, cost me $10, and I put it on top of the roof of my house. It overlooks actually a waterfalls, and this is where I'll write. You can see there at the top of the house. And to get up there, I use this ladder. And let's go to neat. So I thought I'd share it.
Bob, that is an awesome workspace. I love that. That is terrific. And now I want to climb up on your roof.
Well, everyone here is welcome. There's a sort of a legal max of only like, I think 120 people, but we'll take turns.
Bob, I want to talk a little bit about your bookstore book. As I noted in your introduction, you're a strong advocate of independent bookstores, and of course we are also. Probably the largest one here in Wake County, and the best known is called Quail Ridge Books. And they're the ones we use when we have our conference. We work with them to bring in presenter books for sales, as we did with Tiffany when she joined us last year. Um, tell us how the bookstore book came to be, but mostly tell us what you learned from this experience. What was the takeaway for you writing a book about bookstores?
Well, initially it started off simply as an assignment. I was doing a magazine assignment on bookstores. Everyone wants to help out a little bit, but it wasn't at the scope at which it became later. This simply started as a piece for the New Yorker, talking about, bookstores at the beginning when Amazon first started making its footprint. So I started feeling like, let's raise awareness. That afternoon, after the New Yorker ran the piece, I got calls from my agent that publishers wanted me to do a book. Now I'm sharing this. I'm sorry it sounds braggy, but I want to illustrate the gravitas of the New Yorker. I do jobs for like Funny Times Magazine, Cat Fancy, magazines that nobody heard of. It could be the littlest magazines, and I gladly do it. But I have to say, if you can get in the New Yorker, it changes your life. And in that case, that's what happened. I mean, it used to be a time where if I did a cartoon in the New Yorker, it's not that way now since Bob Mankoff got fired. But back then, there was great gravitas. That week that a cartoon ran in the magazine, I'd get calls all week, and it would make me thousands of dollars. I would be like asked to do an animated TV commercial for CBS, or I'd be doing an ad for IBM or something like that. It just exploded. And that's the power of the New Yorker back then. In this case, the same afternoon that the article ran, Penguin Random House made an offer, and the idea of doing the book went to auction, without a proposal. They just liked the idea of expanding it. I'm sure many of you have heard the story of that Shouts and Murmurs piece that ran in the New Yorker about a cat. And then that woman got an offer for $1.2 million for a book deal for her first book, just from a short story. So that's what used to happen 10 years ago. In my case, I did the book with Penguin Random House. And during the course of the research of collecting the bookstore stories, there was about 200 stories, or maybe 250 stories. And I would pick the best ones from that group. I started really getting emotionally invested in what I was writing about, because I was meeting with the owners and they were giving me the heartbreaking stories about, what was happening to them, how difficult it was. And from there, it turned into something totally different, where I began writing op-eds across the country, making a case against Amazon and trying to defend mom and pop shops. And then I was speaking on panels about it. And then I would do, radio shows trying to explain to everyone the logistics of why Amazon can gobble up everything and the behind the scenes of what's happening that regular book buyers would not know. An example would be is people always say, how can Amazon price it so low? Well, there's the no overhead, but it's also because they're making so much money preying on writers who are dying to get published and do well with their book. And they make all this income from those ads you see underneath the books that say, well, if you like this book, we think you might like that book. Well, there are people who are paying monthly to get that real estate so they can promote their book. And that's how they can make up they can sell books as much as they want for nothing with no profit margin and still make more than bookstores. So I would do my book events and I would explain that and also tell the crowd that when they were like using their cell phone to get the information about a book so they could buy it later on Amazon, and explained that the bookstores were paying their taxes, to help have police on the street and to be a location, an intellectual hub for each town where like-minded people could go and meet. And there was other activities going on in bookstores, whether it's people who are poets speaking or musicians or whatever it may be, writing clubs, book clubs, things that Amazon was not providing. And the bookstores were paying for that space. So by the time the book was out, I was all in. I was really getting into like what was going on with bookstores and saw it in a whole different light. I was getting educated. I was really moved by the situation. And I've been pretty much devoted to that since. And I came out with a book right after that that was the thank you to bookstores that helped make my bookstore book a New York Times bestseller by having a book about just cartoons about bookstores. They loved that. They just needed a laugh, and it was meant for just them. And I've been trying to do books that have a special experience for the reader, give them a tactile experience that they could not get had they read the book on a Kindle or something you can't even recognize on Amazon. But you notice a special quality when you're in a bookstore in person and you pick up a book and it kind of speaks to you in some way. And the ways to get that could be all different ways. For instance, for the bookstore book, it opens like a garage door just to make it feel like it's something different. I've been doing that with all my books. There's always something different. I did a book, The Elements of Stress, because everyone was suffering during the pandemic. It's a parody of The Elements of Style. And that book comes with a stress ball that is the shape of a book that says Elements of Stress. And it's all kind of tying in some way to make people laugh, to just try to get them through the day, because God knows it is not easy. And we all have our stuff. I know everyone tells me they can't get their book done and they can't get their work done. And it's because they have this or that and they have a special situation. And I do try to remind people is that everybody's got stuff. I got plenty of stuff that I'm dealing with. And it's not easy. And we all have to get through it in some way. But I say that because it helps to hear that we all have something that's not easy. We all have loss. We all have parents we're dealing with or are gone, and we're dealing with their stuff, like that cartoon I did where someone's left with all that stuff. We've been going through that in our family where everyone's been passing away, and we have stuff. And so hearing that, I think, helps to get you to understand that I understand. I'm in your corner. I'm going through the same thing. I encourage you to keep going. None of us are competing with each other, all writers. There's room for all of us. And it's more important that we all support each other than to fight each other. There's no reason to feel like, oh, this person got this or that person got that. There's room for everybody, even though it doesn't seem like it, but there is.
Bob, it's nice to talk to a fellow Cat Fancy contributor. Cat Fancy was one of the first three markets I ever sold a freelance article to back in the 1980s. And I ended up writing a ton of articles for that publication. I loved Cat Fancy. Absolutely loved it. Hey, listen,
That's
I want
funny.
to talk a little bit about your writing influences. As a freelance writer, as a nonfiction writer, who speaks to you? Who do you find most interesting?
It's too hard to answer because it's a collective influence. It's from a zillion things, and it's not even just from books. It's just from your upbringing. It's hearing your father's voice in your head. It's watching The Odd Couple. I'm reading now all these different books by friends. Um, I'm big into humor, so I read books like Michael Palin is someone who is a friend. I read his books. All my friends have books, so I got to read their books. And the pile of books on my bed are so high, you'd have to be a mountain goat to get into bed. You have to climb over this enormous pile. And I'm trying, but for the most part, it doesn't totally dictate what I'm going to write. Like right now, actually, the last two books I'll mention is this. I read Tiffany Martin's book on editing yourself. And I'm following her rules to how to do that. And so I'm up at the point in which she says to just read the book now and don't make corrections throughout the whole thing, but just take it all in as a whole and then assess where there might be something missing from the whole book. So I did that. And then I decided to do something else. As a comparison, I'm going to read Moby Dick. And I got to tell you, I don't remember it being so difficult. My agent forgot to tell me how difficult that is. I'm up to like chapter 2, and I think I might bail. But I got the spirit of it, and I think I got the atmosphere. Like I'm feeling the ocean rain and the salt water. And now I'm just going to go right back into my book. And I'm not really answering your question, but I want to answer it this way. I'm very careful not to let anything be too big an influence. In the same way, I can't take in now everything with humor and cartoons for fear that subconsciously you will take some part of it and might not be totally original. I've got to like not read too much because then it seeps into my own writing. And the goal with my writing is understanding I'm not a great writer, but I'm a very good storyteller. Not verbally, but on paper, I think I tell a good story. And I'm just going to not worry about all my other shortcomings, like not being a great writer, but just tell the story the best way I can and not let other influences be too powerful that you start seeing those influences within my own work. Just keep it to myself as if I'm telling Don, I'm like you and me, or at a coffee shop, and I'm telling you the story that way. Because otherwise, I'm too self-conscious and it shows up in my work. People are constantly sending me manuscripts and things to look over, asking me to read and give them feedback. And the biggest thing I see is people overwriting things. It's too flowery, it's too unnatural from what people's voice would naturally be. And so I try to avoid that.
Do you know AJ Jacobs?
Should I?
No, he's a humorist also. But it's funny you should mention Moby Dick because yesterday he sent out a blast to his subscribers. He's reading Moby Dick and he was talking about there's a dick joke in there and there's a fart joke in there, but he really, really makes you work for it, was the takeaway from AJ Jacobs about Moby Dick. He's
Yep.
enjoying it in
Yeah.
a weird, frustrating kind of way.
Yeah, well, the rules are so different then. It's the way everyone spoke. And, like right now I'm doing one of the books I'm doing, and again, I juggle projects at once. One of the things I'm doing is an 1850 diary, but I cannot do it the same way an 1850 diary would be because it would be too much work for the writer to read the lavish script that most people wrote or the verboseness of the way everyone spoke. It's just too much work. People have a smaller attention span. I have to read the room and meet them halfway somewhere. There's always, to me, everything is decisions. It's never about talent. When people say, "Oh, your drawings and your cartoons, you're so talented," I hear people say that. They say your cartoons, they like my cartoons, and they say, "Oh, you do nice cartoons." It's not about the drawing or the punchlines. It's just about the decision making the right choices of when that line was the funniest and when the drawing should stop and I don't overwork it. And if I'm writing a short story, when I overdo it, it's a question of making those decisions and when knowing that it's at its best. And my friends who don't get published, who are writing on books and stuff, they overdo it and they peaked earlier. I might see something of theirs, a book or something. I think, oh, the book was better back then. And they reached a point of going past it. Earlier, I showed a portrait I did of Jack Handy. And I asked him for this help. I said, "How do you know when the work is at the point you should stop? When do you know your book is at stop?" And he goes, "It's just a feeling that you feel like you've run out of changes and you just feel like you don't want to touch it." And so, I mean, everyone else has got their own method of doing it, but I've taken that to heart and do the same thing. If I feel like it's right, like the Rubik's Cube cartoon, I did feel like I reached a point that it was right. It just felt right. And then I knew then to stop. It doesn't mean that every time I do a cartoon, it takes 2 years to reach that moment. Sometimes that moment can happen in 10 minutes when I know a joke lands. And then most of the time, I would say most of the time, my jokes don't land well. And it's because I'm lazy not to go back and ask the question, what if? Did I push the envelope? Did I do the best job? But if I do focus and just know that, there's always a better thing, often I could find it at its best point. And then there's the decision to stop.
Bob, I want to end on a kind of a bit of a personal question. I'm a huge fan of cartoonist George Booth. Absolutely love George Booth. He's one of my favorites, and his captions, I believe he holds the record for the longest cartoon caption ever published in the New Yorker. I wanted to ask if you knew George and your thoughts on him as a cartoonist and a storyteller as a cartoonist, because all of his cartoons, and as you said, yours also, tell a story. What are your recollections of George?
Well, let me first say that a good cartoonist is a storyteller, not just George, but everyone, if they're able to condense their story and share a moment in a drawing, and then you could see again, you're engaging the reader. The reader knows what happened before and after the moment. George is someone who is a friend. Um, he passed away a few years ago. Um, I have a lot of George stories.
Hmm.
I'll share one that's kind of interesting. He was getting rejected for a very long time. It took him over 20 years to get a cartoon accepted in the New Yorker. And he used to commute from Port Jefferson into the city to meet with Lee Lorenz, the cartoon editor, where he would show his weekly batch, I'm sorry. And a batch means you have like 10 sketches that you try to sell. And he had no luck for so long. This is before my time. I didn't start until 2007. So this is going back a ways. But another friend used to commute with him into the city, another cartoonist named Sid Harris. And Sid Harris said, "You know what might help with your drawings? Why don't you draw in on the train? Do the drawings on the train and then turn them in when we get to the New Yorker." So George gave it a try, and that's where he got that squiggly line and all those lines. Up until then, his lines were all smooth and wasn't distinct. It didn't prove that he had his own voice until he started doing this style that the vibration from the train created. When he was doodling on the train, little cats and dogs, Sid would say, "Put those in." So next thing you know, all these cats and these different animals showed up. And of course, George always had a great sense of humor. Like Sam, they kind of developed their humor chops in the Army. They both worked for the Army magazine, doing thousands of drawings of all sorts for all the different Army magazines back then. And in the Army, the stress brought out humor in a lot of people, which often does. The adverse conditions and being around men created an atmosphere where it was open, and a lot of their humor at that time was blue. And and George was a great man, very giving. I remember some of the comments he made about my drawings that I'll never forget, because coming from a legend like him, it meant a lot.
I'd like to. George published a number of cartoons about writing. And I'd like to conclude our talk and then we'll move on to audience questions, Bob, if you don't mind. But I'd like to read the caption to my absolute favorite George Booth cartoon. And the setup is there's a writer, he's out on the veranda, he's got a typewriter in front of him, and his wife is bringing him some food. And she's saying, I've got an idea for a story. Gus and Ethel live on Long Island on the North Shore. He works 16 hours a day writing fiction. Ethel never goes out, never does anything except to get Gus sandwiches, and in the end, she becomes a nympho-lesbo killer whore. Here's your sandwich. I love that cartoon.
There's a cartoon he did that has a very similar setup. She comes out and surrounded with cats, and she goes,
Oh,
"Write what you know."
dogs.
Oh,
It's like,
dogs?
write about dogs is the caption.
Yeah.
In the book. It's in the your this one, cartoon book of book cartoons, which by the way, everybody watching this should definitely go out and buy. Bob edited it. And
I don't think that you can buy it anymore. It's sold out.
is it
I'm
really?
serious. Yeah,
Well,
it's not available anymore. Because yeah. But George, at that point, he was working on all cylinders. And to write a caption like that is purely confidence. Yeah, that's all confidence that you could go in that direction and pursue it that way. And it's a master at his craft. Um, so, I mean, we all have those moments where we feel it's just right. We wish we could bottle it so we could always say that we could find ourselves in that zone again where we just write with this sort of swagger, and you just know that you know what you're doing. You're at the control of the wheel, and it's all systems go. Doesn't always happen, but with George, he has such a calm about him. He was someone who was extremely warm and friendly, and it was just his nature to be a good person.
I had the opportunity to interview him several years ago, and he was exactly that. He was exactly that. Super, super nice. And I discovered him in the 70s, and I've been a fan ever since. Bob, I could keep this conversation going for another 2 hours, but I know that
People are saying, please
I have
don't,
some
please
questions
don't.
for you. Does anyone have any questions for Bob? Anything you'd like to talk with him about? Marcus,
Hi,
unmute.
Mark.
Go ahead,
Yep.
Mark.
How about that? Can you hear me now?
Yep. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Bob. Yeah, I was telling you earlier that I'd done some cartooning and mostly for small markets and stuff. But one of the things I'm always curious about as far as other people's procedures and that sort of thing is, do you use a pencil to do your initial sketches, or do you use like a blue pencil? Because I know a lot of people will do that because it doesn't show up on, reproducible media.
I was on a YouTube show. They wanted to know, what do you need to do cartoons? The show was a very large audience of cartoonists, many of them from the New Yorker. They wanted to know, what equipment do you need to do? So my bonsai plant had recently died, and I broke off a twig, and I used an inkwell, and I drew the cartoon with a stick on paper, as is, the same way I did in my fourth year in college at Pratt Institute, when my instructor said to me that I had reached a point that was detrimental to my work. I had started doing photorealistic freelance illustration. And he goes, "You're ruining everything. You're not being creative. You're so closed in and you're so married to realism." So he had me draw the rest of the semester lefty with a stick. And it opened me up to make decisions and abandon all my craft. And as a matter of fact, if you look at my books, the bookstore book and the museum book, the illustrations do not have really detail or accuracy. Everything is about form and color and hues clashing and creating a certain mood, a certain feeling. And I've not caught up at all with the responsibility of drawing accurately. That said, to answer your question, how I do cartoons, it starts off with a list. There's a constant moving list of about 100 ideas. And as the ideas keep on improving and I work on the ideas, they get moved up to the top of the list. And it's the top of the list that I'll start to think about drawing, but not until it makes it to the top do I begin drawing that cartoon idea or story. It could be a story. Like right now, I had the story about wearable AI clothes that are all AI. So it's going to be like, a bra that does your finances and your personal whatever, and socks that do this or what. So that idea will get moved up, and then once I get there, I will do a drawing maybe in pencil. I could use an Apple pencil. I could use a pen. It makes no difference. As a matter of fact, when I finish it, it can be many different ways. It depends on what's near me. If a pencil is the closest thing near me, then it's in pencil. If it's an Apple pencil because I'm away, maybe I'm on the subway and I have electronic pencil with an iPad, I'll draw it that way. Or if it's a pen or magic mark, it makes no difference. It's all in the think, not in the ink. Everything is based on how strong the idea is. The Rubik's Cube could have been done any way. It wouldn't have made it any worse or better. I really believe that. And if it does matter how it's drawn and stuff, then the idea is not strong enough.
Mhm. So it's all about transferring the idea from your brain to some sort of media. Doesn't matter if it's
Right. And that
Paper or
seems
whatever.
too, now that seems too abstract and conceited because I'm saying you could draw any way you want. I would suggest that you just simply draw everything the way, with different mediums and find out what you're most comfortable with. You just look back and say, what did seem most natural to me? But there's certainly no wrong or right way. But, you do want to make something look like it doesn't look like something else. If your work is coming out that it looks similar to something else, then I would run the other direction.
Yeah.
But this blue line and stuff like that, that's something that I used to do when I was young as a kid. But I quickly learned that there is no right or wrong. It's all about opening it up to be playful. If it takes using crappy paper to write down ideas for a story, because if you have expensive watercolor paper, you're too confined and afraid to make a mistake, and you're afraid to be creative and playful, then that's not your wheelhouse. You have to be allowing yourself mistakes.
It's all about fun.
Yeah, because otherwise, the work feels it. You could tell when a work feels, I call this sweaty humor, sweaty comedy, when a stand-up has really crafted their jokes so much and so structured, they've lost sight of a beauty of a joke that feels spontaneous. Even if it's not spontaneous, you want it to feel that way. You want the writing to feel that way, that it feels like it just came naturally, like you would talk. When it's overwritten, it's guilty of feeling sweaty.
Yeah. So it started spontaneous and then turned into something else.
Yeah, right.
Bob, Allison was wondering if you might have some super quick advice for her teen daughter who is an aspiring cartoonist. Any thoughts?
Well, I would say the current landscape is not very, very lucrative. It's very hard out there. A lot of the markets have disappeared. So I would say do not stop doing cartooning and stop doing what you love doing. But think about collecting all the different things you can in your toolbox. Consider yourself a toolbox and you're going to collect all these different skills and you're able to do cartoons and you're able to do, let's say, graphic journalism, or you're able to do live drawing at business meetings or whatever it is that you're able to do. So you're ready for the opportunity. Don, I know we've talked about this where you said you'd be ready for whatever came your way you had taken on. And at this rate, I think everyone has to be open-minded that they'll do things if it's not exactly what they want to do. And I'm not saying that people should stop doing cartooning, because I always say to people who are trying to make it that you don't have to make money doing cartoons. It could be a love and a passion and be something that helps you in life, having that outlet. But I don't think you could count on one thing right now and say, I'm just going to be, let's say, a medicine illustrator. I think it's just too risky to do one thing. So my recommendation is to get into cartooning, learning everything you can about it, and also do other things, web design and whatever it may be, or learn that cartooning doesn't have to be what we all expect, but it can be animated online and work for cartooning for games and for websites or whatever it may be. But it is not easy in the arts. You have to open up as many options as possible.
And I think Joel has a super quick comment about AI.
I just want to ask if Allison felt that that was helpful. I mean, Allison, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, yeah, that very, but it's more like as you can see, it's more graphic novel, anime. I mean, she creates all these little characters with their little quirks and their personalities, and she just does it. She does it for hours and hours and hours. And I mean, she's got like books with stories, and so it's more like a graphic novel interest. And then specifically cartooning isn't, I mean, what would you call this? It's more anime maybe, or
Yeah, well, I would definitely try to encourage her to drift away from that, because everyone's sending me their sons and daughters' work. It's all the same because they're so enamored with that style of Magna that it's just a copycat.
Magna, that's right, Magna.
Right. It's like in the 1940s where every kid was drawing Mickey Mouse and they wanted to just do that.
Yeah.
The answer
I don't
is
want to discourage. You don't want to discourage them, though. You know what I mean? It's a fine
well,
line.
well, there is, but the answer would be really the answer is to expose her to different things.
Yeah.
She's got to see other art, whether it's going to museums and other books and seeing what else is there, because she's a little bit in a vacuum. And I know this, that I see so many students, I used to teach at NYU, and all the students' work would be identical. And at one point I talked to my class about questions about who's their favorite ball player, what's their favorite show. Everyone had the same answer because everybody was afraid to stand out. But that's going to be the key to anyone's success. Nobody needs work that looks identical to other work that's out there. So the way to get her out of that rut is to exhaust her out of it. You have to show her that she's tired of it, demonstrate that she discovers other things, so she expands her artistic vocabulary.
Thank you.
That
That's great.
Joel?
I was going to say, please do the newsletter and let her see the newsletter. I give tips about art and stuff.
I have. I'm already signed up. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. I wish you luck.
Oh, thank you.
Joel?
Thanks.
The comment I had about AI is, and I've got 43 years as a freelance sculptor, so I'm familiar with the art aspect. I recall years ago that a lot of the bread and butter for some graphic artists went away when Microsoft desktop publishing came out. People had all of a sudden had, because you could use Microsoft Word, etc. But that hasn't stopped folks from writing novels or books on cats or what have you. And I'm reminded of a story about photography. I don't remember the artist's name, but in the late 1830s, he saw his first photograph and he despaired. He says, painting is dead. Well, we all know now that painting is not dead, but it had to go in different directions. The same thing, by the way, is true of sculpture. I've had pieces that were, I made a model and it was duplicated large by somebody else. the question comes up, is that AI, or or because I thought up the idea, I don't feel particularly confined by AI, at least not yet.
Thank
Well, what's the question for me?
No, I would just make the comment about
Well,
AI.
I'd like to respond. And first, I want to start with a fun fact. One of the first photographs ever made by the pioneer of photography, Mary Dillon in Wales, was of a snowman. But regarding AI, there's always the stories where people say, well, when TV came out, they thought that radio would be dead. But this isn't a discussion of convenience by making those comparisons of explaining, that type of advancement in technology didn't kill something. I really believe it's case by case. It's just convenience to say that this is the same thing that happened with the examples you said. It isn't. As I mentioned earlier, I had to fire 12 people who lost their job. And there's a lot of people who I know, like for instance, who do book voiceovers. All the voiceover people are losing their work. It is not the same thing by no means. This is something greater than that. And people are going to find out that, I think, too late. It's going to be very hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube by the time people realize the ramifications of not fully appreciating and respecting the power of AI. Right now, we don't even know what's what. Here's an interesting, I think, point for freelancers of all kinds is that I get about 100 emails a day. And I don't know, about three or four of them are for assignments. And I think most of them are fake. I can't even tell when I have a fake assignment from a real assignment. They're getting so good at offering me work. I don't even know how to figure it out. I often have to go to other people and figure out how we're going to get to the bottom of it to figure out if I just got spammed.
Does anyone else have any questions for Bob? Bob, I want to take a moment. Donna Gephardt has joined us. Donna and I have been friends for quite a long time. She's a very gifted middle grade author and a humorist. And I just thought it would be a good idea that you guys know each other because Donna is such a talented writer, and you're a talented writer, and both of you are into humor. And plus, I just really like Alan. I just really like her. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Donna was also one of our presenters several years ago at our annual writing conference. So,
And one of the best.
yeah, absolutely. She literally brought the audience to tears. That's not an exaggeration. She had people weeping, and that is a good speaker right there.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any thing for Bob? All right, Bob, thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted
Oh,
to,
Sue?
yeah, I don't really know what I want to say, but it's so inspiring to listen to you. And, you know, I love the New Yorker and, so much of the humor. And it's just nice that you're fighting the fight. Actually, as you were talking, I kept thinking of Roz Chast, and she wrote a lot, and of course Booth. I think what I remember about Booth was the dogs and the cats that were all nuts. So I just love going there with humor. Thank you.
I have a lot of Roz stories. We're pretty close friends. On the side, if you want to hear them, I won't keep everyone, but Sue, if you want to keep in touch.
Yeah, I just signed up for your newsletter, and my last name is Anger, so you'll never forget that. But
I like that.
yeah, and
Keep
it's my
people
real
in
name.
line.
And she wrote a great book, and I'm sure you've read it, when her parents were dying. I know that doesn't sound humorous, but it was hysterical.
No, it's very important. She wrote a book about how to handle the situation of bringing up living wills and all that stuff. And that book is actually very important to a lot of people.
It is.
That's
It
an
was
example of making the right choice of like, what do people need?
mm, yeah. I just remember her mother was extremely difficult. Well, at least in the book she was. And she goes, and then she got a blast of chast. I just remember saying that. It was such a hoot.
If
So,
anyone's in the New York area, I think we're doing a talk together at the Frick Collection in the end of this year.
You and Roz?
Yeah, we've done talks before at different museums and stuff. I'll give one quick Roz story. We were at the where was it? The Miami Book Fair, and we were going on, and she actually got stage fright. I had to
mm,
talk her onto going on stage. We were in front of, I think, about 600 people. It was a huge crowd because Henry Winkler was on before us. And I talked her onto going on stage. And we get on stage, and I kind of did my spiel. I showed the slides, some of the slides that you saw earlier. And I'm talking and stuff, waiting for her to pick up. And about 15 minutes in, she started getting relaxed and she talked. And then I never got another word in for an hour. I just couldn't get one single word in. She took over.
Bob, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
This has
you.
been a delightful hour, so inspiring, so motivating. We really, really appreciate the time you've given us today. Really.
No,
This
thank
has
you
been
very
wonderful.
much. No,
Love
it'd be great.
everything.
No, thank you very much, everyone.